Hello everybody, Jason of New 80'S Revolution Cave. And this is the pilot episode of a new show that I'm going to do on the channel here. Visually iconic images that remind us of the 80s. That's right, we'll do one a day, 3 or 4 a week, whatever. What do I mean by visually iconic? I mean when you look at an item, when you look at a brand, when you look at a font, at a color pattern, when something enters your field of vision and immediately flashes you back to childhood, that is what I have coined visually iconic. And these are the visually iconic images that immediately transport us back to childhood. And just looking at these items, the stories begin to flow. So, let's take a look at our first visually iconic image. It's that simple, folks. It's that simple. That's what the show's going to be all about. We're going to talk and reminisce about the memories that are stimulated from the image. And of course, the first one is what? G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe. Now, this show is going to have images that you wouldn't have expected. Of course, we went with the toy image first, but you probably thought I would have picked, LJN or the WWF symbol. No, it's not going to always be that simple. It's going to be stuff that might be deep in the memory archives. I'm already thinking of an item, a household kitchen item that I think is visually iconic and immediately transports us back to childhood. But G.I. Joe, was there any cartoon that gripped us, any cartoon that kung fu gripped us, any faster or any more significantly than G.I. Joe? Think about it. Who were we before G.I. Joe? We were younger kids. Many of us are in our late 40s here on the channel. So, we would watch, Sesame Street. We might watch, the Looney Tunes stuff on our local TV on Saturday mornings. We might have seen Scooby-Doo here and there. But those were kid cartoons. Those were colors and noises and, just a little bit of visual stimulation for kids to stare at. But, there wasn't any meat to those cartoons. There wasn't any real storylines to Tweety and Sylvester, right? We enjoyed it, but I think we enjoyed it because it was a colorful cartoon and we just, we were little kids and we just got zoned into the cartoon, just like my kids did when they were younger with the Baby First channel and, the Harry the Bunny and the Talking Crayons. I mean, those were just, kid cartoons just to keep their minds drawn. But I challenge you to come up with a cartoon that brought our young lives, brought our young attention span, pushed our attention spans a little bit more to almost a series, right? I mean, there weren't only a few episodes had storylines that played into the next episode or storylines that they brought back up again. So yeah, each episode was unique, but for the first time, I think in our cartoon career, we were getting to know characters. We were really differentiating between bad guy and good guy. We were understanding the concept of missions and each episode had a problem to solve. We're starting to get introduced to lessons in morality. Of course, we've all joked about the G.I. Joe PSAs, but, we were being introduced to to something different than just colors and sounds, right? We were watching maybe our first show, right? We were watching a kids show. We were watching, to me, the kids equivalent of a primetime adult series. We were watching the kids equivalent of maybe a soap opera. Yes, of course, it's watered down to children, but G.I. Joe is the first time we're really watching something play out on the screen, some kind of story other than just lights and sounds. Some of you might say, well, I did that with He-Man. Some of you might say I did that with Transformers. Some of you might have some obscure picks. Come on in. Some of you might have some obscure picks. But I think for all of us, or not all of us, for I would say the majority of us, G.I. Joe was our first show, right? Now, take it off, and for me, that logo that would flash across the screen as the credits, or as the intro ended, right? As the intro ended, you got all the action of the cartoon, you got all the clips of the cartoon. At the end of that intro, the G.I. Joe logo flashed across the screen, and you knew that you were in for 22 or 23 minutes of joy. My watching of G.I. Joe happened in the morning before school. So I would get up.
At 7?
I would get up at 6:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and watch G.I. Joe before school. I would literally lay in bed with a 13-inch TV pretty close to me, and I would just lay there and watch it. And I can feel that atmosphere as I'm talking about it right now. I can feel the darkness, I can feel the glow of the TV, I can feel the tiredness, but I can also feel the interest in the storylines, the interest in the characters. Because, as we've talked about many times on the channel, the characters from the TV show very quickly, almost immediately, became available in plastic form. Those characters that we watched on our TVs almost instantly showed up on toy store shelves because they knew what they were doing back then. And it worked. You're watching new characters be introduced on your G.I. Joe cartoon, and then very shortly later, you can go buy that character. When Quick Kick is announced on G.I. Joe, when Quick Kick makes his debut, you know that there's a 100% chance that Quick Kick is going to be out in stores pretty soon. And that connection kept us going because, you watch the cartoon did it right, the comics did it right, they introduced new characters, and you would immediately want an action figure of that character, and you would get one. I don't think you had to wait a year. If a new person shows up in AEW wrestling, you're waiting 8 months, a year longer for that character to come out as a toy. And by that point, it's over. You're done. You've lost interest, right? But G.I. Joe was instant. You had the bases, these massive base play sets that kids loved. You had tons of vehicles to choose from. You could, if you had some imagination, you could be entertained all day with G.I. Joe. Now, with that being said, I didn't have a lot of G.I. Joe figures because I was so wrapped up in wrestling figures. But like pretty much every kid in the 80s, we got toys here and there, whether or not we were interested in them. Your aunt would get you some G.I. Joes. Your grandma would get you some G.I. Joes. You'd have $5 in your pocket. You'd go to Kmart and you'd buy a G.I. Joe. Even if you really didn't want a G.I. Joe, you'd want to spend the $5, so you got a G.I. Joe. So I had a few, but I remember my friend, my best pal Howie, was such a G.I. Joe guy that he had so many. He had, I don't want to say all of them, but he had a lot. And I remember going in his basement one day, and his dad had set up a Cobra World and a G.I. Joe World on card tables. And by world, I mean they put a lot of effort into this. They had the bases, they had the vehicles, they had all the guys set up, and it was really just looking at a diorama. It was a model, right? And I even wondered, how would you play? I don't even know how you'd play. right? You'd have to have a bridge that crossed the two tables so that you could get across and invade each other's turf. But I thought that image, that visually iconic image of that play set, that play setup in Howie's basement is still in my brain. And it's burned in there. So there were mega G.I. Joe fans. And then there were people like me who enjoyed the cartoon, but was just too busy with wrestling figures to really care about the figures. The toy store aisle for G.I. Joe is visually iconic. G.I. Joe, this is at a time when toys overfilled a toy store, right? Not like today when you got these tiny little aisles that barely have anything in there. Entire lengthy aisles were stacked floor to ceiling with G.I. Joe because the boxes were so massive for the vehicles and the play sets that you literally would just they would be stacked. There's so many images on the internet that show old toy aisles of the 80s, and you can see the Joes just stacked. Now the figures themselves were very deep on pegs. 20 figures, these are thin cards, 20, 30 figures all on a peg, and that's just one character. That's just one name. That's Lady J. Next to her, you got 30 Cobras. Next to that, you got 30 Dukes, right? Then below that, you got all the vehicles. Then you got the accessory packs. And it was just overload, total stimulation for kids to walk down a Toys R Us aisle, a Kitty City aisle, and see the G.I. Joe section. Massive, probably the most massive. Maybe Barbie is close, because I remember Barbie having a huge aisle of stuff and dolls and clothes and play sets and houses. But G.I. Joe takes the cake as far as the massive amount of stuff at a toy store back in 1985. That's why G.I. Joe is a visually iconic image that transports us back in time. Tomorrow, next day, we'll do another one. We'll keep talking about it. Let me know your thoughts on the new concept. Put your memories of G.I. Joe down below. We'll see you next time. Good night now.